and welcome back to another Revit video. In this video, we're going to be looking at the final concept to walls, the very specific details of walls actually, and that's going to be sweeps and reveals. We're actually going to edit the type of the wall and actually input this into the wall itself. So one, I highly encourage you to look at all of the previous wall videos in the playlist because they all lead up to this point. Not that this is like the big grand exit, but it's the biggest thing with like actually editing walls specifically. We'll get into other things later on, but I highly encourage you to watch those other videos before this one because it will help you at least get here. And number two, if you would please demolish that like button. It really, really helps me out a lot. And please do that if you learned something or if you just happen to like the video. That really, really helps. So thank you for that. All right, jumping into it now, we are going to cover sweeps and reveals in walls, like actually putting them on there. There's a couple ways to do it. One, of course, we could actually go to the architecture and then sweep and reveal and actually place these sweeps on the walls, which is perfectly fine. I don't have an issue with that, but it turns out this isn't always the most efficient way to do it when it comes to actually putting sweeps or reveals on a wall, because it just so happens that it might be something you want to bake into the wall, and if it's baked into the wall, it's going to have less of an opportunity to end up breaking, and that's definitely something we want to try and avoid when it comes to sweeps and reveals, because they definitely like to break. Okay, so to access that, we're going to go and edit the type, of course. And then we're going to go to the structure, and then here we're going to be in the assembly. And in the previous video, we went through all these different layers, splitting them up, modifying, merging layers, and that's how we got to this point, where we have, basically a wainscot of stone up to a certain point, where we have brick above that, and we've got brick sitting on a slab that's continuing. Not necessarily the best way to model this, and I covered all of that in the previous video, so check that out for sure, because that'll give you more of an idea of how we got here and why. And of course, I can select all these layers and see what they all are a part of. The air layer changes as it hits the stone and so on, so you get an idea. And we have all of our thicknesses and everything that's variable or static, and we can't necessarily change them because we've cut them all up. So that's all from a previous video, and we don't need to mess with that anymore. But we are most concerned about at this point is the sweeps and reveals down here. And of course, we can only access this once we are in the section view here, and with that we can actually start to access the rest of these tools. With that said, let's go into sweeps and reveals. So maybe what I want to do is to continue the real world example of this, we might want to add maybe like a stone cap up here to cap off and split, like truly split the stone from the brick. Makes sense. It's something that you kind of see a lot out there. If you're going to have this sort of a setup, you're probably going to have some sort of a stone cap or some sort of cap to split this up. So in this case, we'll have a different material of stone that's going to end up splitting these two materials. Cool. So where would we do that? Well, this is going to be a sweep, as in it's going to be something that continues along the length of the wall. And just so you know, all sweeps, all reveals are profile based. So that has everything to do with building a profile. And once you've built the profile, you can use it for anything that involves a profile in Revit. In this case, we want those for sweeps reveals. So let's go to sweeps here, and we can see that there's a lot here to look at. We've got the profile, material, distance, from, and orientation, side, offset. There's a ton here, but we've got a couple things that we have to do first. Well, we have to either load a profile if it's not already in our project, or add one. So I'm going to first add one because I've actually made the stone cap, and when it comes to reveals, we'll end up loading one and making one. So let's add here just the profile, and we're going to get default by default. So the profile name is default. And the category for materials is not, it's by category, so there's no material applied. Let's expand this further. We've got a distance of 0. It's from the base or whatever, so all of this is fine. But let's go ahead and hit apply and see what this happens. Well, we get this giant box down here that is applied. And so that's all based on this profile, which happens to be whatever the default is. I don't know if it's 3 inches by 3 inches, or it looks like it's 6 inches by 6 inches at least. So that's a big profile, and it's a square, and it's nothing fancy. So we can see that it's coming from the base, like it's starting at the base. So it's starting from the base. It's perpendicular to the face of the wall, which is perfectly fine. I generally don't need to actually change this from perpendicular or parallel to ground. That doesn't matter as much. And then I have the side is exterior. Obviously, if I change this from exterior to interior, this thing will flip on the other side. I like to hit apply a lot because I can actually start to see the updates here, which is really helpful. With that said, the offset starts to affect the distance from the base. And if we hit apply, we can see that it moves 3 feet up. Actually, we can't even see this here. The offset here, if we put this at 1 foot, of course, we still can't even see that. If we put this at 3 inches, hit apply, we can see that it starts to come 3 inches off of that side, that interior side. Of course, the distance at this point would be the distance from the base, and then we have the offset from the side. So the distance from the base, maybe when we want that to be 2 feet, we can hit apply, and we can see that it comes up 2 feet. Cool. Very good. And then finally, flip is going to actually flip it on the, this axis here, the bottom axis. So it's going to flip basically up and down as opposed to left and right, which is kind of the way I wish it would work sometimes. So let's go ahead and flip it, and we can see it goes down, and then vice versa, it flips it back up. The setback is how far it's actually set back, and then this is cool. We have the option of cutting the wall or not cutting the wall. Obviously, if I have this where it is, it's not going to cut the wall regardless of whether I choose this, but I generally, if I'm making something like this, and in this case it's going to be a stone cap, I will want this to cut the wall because I don't want there to actually be brick accounted for that is like within the profile, within the cap. It doesn't make sense. That's not how the world works. We don't have materials inside of materials like that. It doesn't work. But then we actually have the option of making this cuttable or not, which is kind of cool because it might be that you have something running vertically or something else in general that might hit the wall where it is, and if that's the case, you might want this to be cuttable because you wouldn't actually have it built in another wall or something else. You wouldn't want it to continue necessarily. So I like having that option, but it's dependent on the uses, of course. So with all this, I'm actually going to delete this because we don't want this anymore. I'll hit apply and it's gone. So let's go ahead and add one more here. And the nice thing about this is that we have all of the profiles that are in your project. That's a good and a bad thing. It's bad primarily because you get these weird shapes and different things that you may not need at all if you've made custom mullions or whatever. They're all going to show up here, which is not a big deal, just something to know. But in this case, I made a profile called stone, and I'm going to hit apply, and we can see that it's way out here. Well, I don't want it there. The material, I actually made a material called stone 2. That's perfect. Of course, I want it from the base, and the distance I want it from the base is going to be that, 3 feet? Yeah, so 3 feet here. And I hit apply, and we can see that comes up 3 feet. Of course, we need to change this offset because this is going to be the offset coming from the outset side, or the exterior side, and this is going to be, which is actually an odd dimension, but for the sake of this video, it is 5 1/8 inch for this layer of stone. Probably wouldn't be normally, but it is. And we can see that it comes out. We actually don't want it out. We need to bring it in. So that's going to be a negative number, which is not a huge deal. We make that negative. We hit apply, and we can see that's exactly where we want it. And so because we have this cutting the wall, we can see that we're actually going to cut out this area of brick. And that's exactly why, because otherwise, if I don't have that checked, this brick would actually show up technically inside of this stone cap, which would not be correct at all. And just for the sake of this, I do want this cuttable in case something happens to hit it. Not a huge deal. So that's looking pretty good. So I'll press OK, and now we can clearly see if I click on this brick, it's stopping there at the stone cap, which is great. And everything seems to be lining up pretty well, which is really nice. And I've got the drip edge and everything kind of built into this profile. And really, if you wanted to change this profile at all, you can always come into the profile down here, and I actually have it right there as stone. That's perfectly fine to do. And we can click OK, and OK again, and we can see that it is now within the wall. And if I come into 3D, I can see there it is. And because it's baked into the wall, it literally follows the join settings of the wall, which is awesome. That's kind of a big selling point of putting these within walls, because you don't have to manage all the joins or whatnot. Now again, the cool thing, because it is a profile and because it is a sweep, we have more options than just it's baked into the wall and it follows the wall. I actually still have these endpoints, and so maybe I decide, well, I actually only want that coming here like 7 feet in. Well, look at that. It works all the same, which is fantastic, but still it's baked into the wall. It's just changing that specific instance of that within walls, which is awesome. Now, I'm not going to change that right now. So let's go back into the wall and start playing with reveals. So maybe what I want to do is, instead of having this brick maybe I want to change this to something else. Probably want to change this to, let's go ahead and look for a metal, because maybe I have some metal panels or whatnot. And really, this doesn't quite matter. Anything metal in this case will look just fine. But I want to make sure I put some sort of a metal, how about aluminum there? That will work. And so now we've got this aluminum look. The thickness I'm not going to care so much about, because it might be that my total panel thickness is much less than that, but in section, depending on where we hit, maybe not. But that's perfectly fine. We're going to be okay with that. If you did want to change that, you'd probably have to start modifying this later, and it is something that we can easily do. We can come in here and maybe change this to 1.5 inches, something like that. So that's fine. There's a lot of things that we need to change if we have this, because this is definitely far from a perfect detail. But for the sake of this, we're good to go. So we'll click OK, and of course this changes to metal, not a huge deal, but I want to look at this in section, and we can see that, yeah, that's my metal. Of course, I want to make sure that I can see this better, because the material looks quite awful. And so with this, we want to start playing with some reveals. So again, this is not like a perfect panel or anything, but maybe we want to have some 1/2 inch or even inch reveals within this system, within this section, and within this wall. Well, how would we do that? Well, we can always take any profile we have. And again, we have a handrail profile that can work and things like that. But I highly encourage you to make your own profile if it's for something specific like this, because it really does matter. You don't want people to use a railing. I mean, if you end up using a railing profile, for example, it might be that someone edits that railing profile because they need to change the railing, and then it impacts your sections, and in this case, all the walls that have this reveal. That's not the way we want to do it. So I'm going to come all the way down to profiles, and it's kind of up to you whether you want this to be a specific profile. I typically, for the most part, just make it a basic profile, which means it's going to show up everywhere that I want to use a profile. That's kind of up to you. Your preference does not matter. So at this point, let's go ahead and just make a basic box. That's really all it is. It can be really any size, because we're going to add some parameters to it. We want to have a little more flexibility. I definitely like doing this just because it makes a little more sense. We'll have a reference plane here and here. Make sure we lock this there, lock this here. I've got some other videos on families and basically making these basic parameters and have everything kind of work functionally together. So I'm not going to go over that, but we do want to add some parameters here based on these dimensions. Nothing too special, nothing too crazy, but we want to have some flexibility here. So again, I think by default, I want this to be about 1/2 inch. And with that, we've got our profile right there, and I need to make these need to actually make these parameters, which we can do here. I'm going to call this length, have this be a type. That's perfectly fine. I'm actually going to make the same one here, which means we just have a square. Now, regardless of what changes here, if we want to make this 1 inch, it becomes 1 inch. So that's all great. But again, maybe I want to make this 1/2 inch. Cool. So I will save this, of course, always save this. We want to call it reveal in a panel. Cool. Name it whatever you want, but definitely please name it. That's definitely something you want to do. And so with that, we're here, we're back. So let's go back to my section and into my wall type. Of course, edit this. We want to see the preview. We need to see the preview in section. And so with all of this, we can finally come down to reveal. And we have the exact same, basically the same settings here as sweeps, which is really nice. We just learned what those are. They're very simple. And so we don't need to worry about loading our profile because we just did that. But if you have a profile in a different location or project, that's how you do it. We can go ahead and add. Of course, we see the default, which we don't want, but then we can come all the way down to reveal in panel. Cool, there it is. I can hit apply, and it actually doesn't show up yet. Well, we need to actually get it somewhere where it might begin to cut something. So we're going to be here at the exterior side. Of course, we want the offset to be whatever it ends up being. In this case, 1/2 inch. We want to come 1/2 inch inside of this particular. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we are a certain distance above the ground. We want to make sure we deal with that. And that's going to be that 3 feet at least. So maybe we may go ahead and make this 4 so we could definitely see where this might show up. So I'm going to zoom in here, and we can actually see it's very tiny and right there. And it turns out we may not even want that 1/2 inch offset, which is perfectly fine. Making that 0 is very easy to do. So I hit apply there. And there it is. We can see it right there. And so it's 4 feet basically to the bottom of it. And so this might be something I do. I'm going to hit OK. I probably want to edit this a little bit better. And not only that, I want to actually have a couple of different types here. So I've got reveal right there. And so let's go ahead and rename this to 1/2 inch. We want to actually organize things here. And then let's go ahead and make another one that's 1 inch. And for the 1 inch, of course, we want this to be 1 inch. So with that said, we actually have these two different types. But you'll notice if I measure this from the actual base of the wall up to this point, we can see that that is actually our 4 feet. Whereas typically when it comes to reveals, you want to actually have that dimension to the center. So which means we actually need to edit this one more time. This is my fault, but that's the way it works. So we're going to have to copy this down. And then I'm going to go ahead and things are going to break because that's what happens. We'll remove the constraints. We'll lock that there. We want to make sure that this is now right there, and we can go ahead and put our length back. We want to make sure that these are equal. And with that said, we can now apply this to our length. And with that, now we have that center point, which is going to be typically where you dimension to actually the center of our reveal. And it doesn't matter which, if it's 1 inch, 1/2 inch, doesn't matter. Cool. We'll go ahead and load this in, save this, and now basically everything's going to move down and our dimensions are going to work out really well. So here we go. Go back to our dimensions from our level. And because the profile is baked into the wall, we unfortunately don't have the option of using that actual origin point or origin plane as a way of like actually dimensioning, which I have a problem with, and that's just because it's within the wall. But I'm going to draw that line just so we can dimension to it, and I can show you exactly where that 4 feet is hitting. So there's my 4 feet, and so that dimension now is accurately placed within the center of that reveal. Okay, so that's good to know. So with that said, we can actually come back into our wall and place these however often we want. And so the cool thing about not only reveals but also sweeps is that you can have as many as you want throughout the whole wall, and you can place them wherever you want based on anything else. And so we have it there. It's at 4 feet. We've got our reveals here, and I can add the same one again. I can duplicate this here, and maybe we decide, well, the next one's going to be 1 inch, and that's going to be 5 feet from the base. And then we're going to actually duplicate this first one again, because I decided, yeah, maybe we actually want to make this one, 6 feet off the ground and have this be another 1/2 inch. You can start to see what happens here. So with all of this, it's going to actually reorient based on the distance from the base or the distance from wherever you're going from. And so if I hit OK here, we can see that we have multiple reveals in this wall, which is really cool. And now the thing to note about this, both reveals and sweeps in this way, is that they are going to come from the base, or in this case, the top. It's one or the other. And that is completely independent of the actual height of your wall. So you'll get into some errors. Let's say I make this a 2-foot wall. Well, I'm already going to have some errors because I basically have things, components and layers of the wall that will not show up if I make this a 2-foot wall. And not only that, if I have a 2-foot wall that has reveals 4 and 5 feet up, you won't be able to see those at all. And that's just something to know. You can make these all you want, but you won't see them, and perhaps you might throw some errors and have some issues. So just kind of know that. But I want to add one more, and you can do this as much as you want, which is really cool. The nice thing about it is that all you need to do, in this case, if we're just duplicating things around, is change the actual, number associated to the distance and the offsets, because that's all that really needs to change. So with all of this, we could see we got nice profiles that continue, and the reveals, good to go. And so I'm doing this because maybe we have different metal panels and we have different reveal sizes, and perhaps the wall is not actually this tall. Maybe it's only 10 feet. Maybe it's only 9 feet, whatever it is when it's a beam, but we have these different reveals. So the cool thing is, look at this. This is working really well. Not only do we have these sweeps built into the wall, but we have these reveals. And like I said before, with the sweeps, the reveals, they work the same way as well. We can drag these ends. Maybe we have one panel that changes here. It might be that you need to actually, show this show something else here, and so these reveals will stop there. I don't know, whatever it might be. But the really nice thing is that all of this can work together. All of this is working together, looking really nice, and it's really easy. And so that's definitely an advantage of having all of this work together, is that it doesn't matter if I have another one of these walls. The angle doesn't matter, because all of these profiles are still going to be in the wall, working together and sweeping or revealing across all the walls, which is really cool. That's kind of the point of doing this. And so, like I said before, we can always come over here to sweeps and reveals and do the exact same thing. Now, the issue with this, and this is not so much an issue, it's just more of something to know, if you can't actually make anything vertical, like we created in we can only work with these types of things in section. So it's just something that's going to happen consistently across the entire wall regardless. So which means you can't do anything vertically. And because if you do anything vertically, it's just going to impact the whole wall. That's kind of the point. And so the unfortunate part about this is that for anything vertical, really the best solution is to actually have a reveal here. And of course we have to associate whatever reveal we want. In this case, maybe it's the 1/2 inch. And we actually have to place this vertically, which is unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. And of course we'd have to move this on its own, because we don't want this to be right there. We'd probably have it start at the cap, which, it's kind of up to you. At this point, it just kind of is what it is. So we've made panels. We basically made panels without having to physically place panels or model panels. Please don't do that. We didn't even use the curtain wall. You could do that, but you've gone to the point where you'd have to edit the profiles. So you might as well just bake it into a wall. Tons of things like that. So really, that is kind of it, because again, we're limited to this vertical. Unfortunately, I wish there was a way to place these kind of vertical elements as reveals or sweeps or whatnot, like we do work with curtain wall grids, where they can be consistent and built into walls. Again, maybe the way around this, I guess, technically would be to make this curtain wall, have these verticals ever so often, and then you can just, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. There are ways around it, but there's not great ways around it. So this is typically what I would do for something like this, is deal with all the horizontals in the wall and then place the verticals as needed, because at least you're only dealing with that. Everything else you can edit within the wall. So a lot of times I end up baking in actual copings for the top of the walls as sweeps, because we know we need those. That's going to be at the top of most of your walls, and then at the end of the day, that's something you might as well bake into the wall, because I've had hell trying to get sweeps, actually not just sweeps, but like specifically copings, because of the details in the profiles sometimes not work. You hit an angle, and just you have overlapping profiles, and then that's just a mess. It breaks, and whatever. You might as well bake that into the wall, and it will kind of reconcile itself out. So that will do it for this video. We looked at all the different sweeps and reveals as far as like putting those and baking them in, like I'd like to say, into walls, because it's really is a much better way of doing it if you have a ton of sweeps and a ton of walls that have it, instead of placing these things manually. Of course, we have to do that with the vertical elements, but in the end, that's not the end of the world. Unfortunately, we have to do that with the verticals. But again, that will do it for this video. If you happen to learn something or just like the video, which I hope you did, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate it if you have. So again, that will do it for this video. Have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.